Luke Castellan is a character from the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series by Rick Riordan. Luke also appears in the Disney Plus show of the same name, and he was played by Charlie Bushnell. As a fan of the books, I liked Charlie's portrayal of Luke, but something that I noticed in the show was that they changed Luke's character quite a bit. For the most part, Charlie was the Luke we saw in the books, but they made some big shifts in his character that I didn't really expect. Looking back at them though, I realized that they made the right decisions, as they changed Luke for the betterment of his character. In this video, I'll be expanding on this idea and explaining how the Disney Plus show changed Luke Castellan for the better. As always, there will be spoilers in this video. And with that, let's get started. Before we get into what the Disney Plus show changed in Luke, we have to know Luke from the books. In the PGO books, Luke was described as a pretty chill guy who was a great fighter and leader to a lot of people. Under this personality, however, Luke had a darker side, as he held so much anger against the gods, and it fueled him to seek revenge against them. This was brought up by Luke's childhood of his mentally unstable mother, and his father, the god of thieves Hermes, leaving them early on. This left Luke to resent the gods, thinking that his father was an all-powerful god who didn't seem to care about him, but he failed to see the bigger picture of things and realized that his dad loved him, and that staying away from Luke was the one thing that Hermes could do, because Hermes couldn't change Luke's horrible future. Luke would go on to have a deep-rooted hatred against the gods, that even the Titan Lord Kronos sensed it. Kronos would manipulate Luke's anger, and this persuaded Luke to join Kronos. This would lead to the many adventures and quests in the 5 books, and Luke was one of the most important plot details in these books. With all this, let's get into how the Disney Plus show tweaked Luke's character into a different light. I guess the most obvious change to point out is Luke's appearance, because he sort of looked like book Percy instead of his book counterpart. In the books, Luke had blonde hair and blue eyes, while in the show, he had dark hair and dark eyes. This was a pretty big change that some fans pointed out, but to be honest, Charlie's appearance wasn't the biggest change in Luke's character. I'm going through the show right now, and the one thing I noticed instantly as a change, aside from Luke's appearance, is the detail of his relationship with Annabeth Chase. So let's talk about Annabeth and Luke in the books. Whenever you bring up the relationship that Luke and Annabeth had, you'll be confronted by many things because of some unresolved questions that the series left us with. We learned pretty early on in the Lightning Thief book that Annabeth had a crush on Luke, and she does a lot of things to make herself look good in front of him. She loved him and looked up to him, as she thought that Luke was her hero. This brings back Annabeth's past, wherein she ran away from home and met Luke and Thalia Grace along the way. Luke was the one who gave Annabeth her signature bronze dagger, and he supported her throughout her life until his betrayal. He was one of the most important people to her, and she eventually developed a crush on him. On Luke's side, we learned early on in the Lightning Thief book about how Luke felt about Annabeth. Luke admits to Percy through an iris message that Annabeth was like a little sister to him, but Annabeth wasn't able to witness this. It seemed to be settled here that Annabeth's liking towards Luke was one-sided, and it seemed to be concluded there. These feelings Annabeth had for Luke would slowly fade away as the series progressed, as she started to fall in love with Percy instead. Which, side note, thank goodness for that, because Luke is technically 7 years older than Annabeth. Imagine the weird age gap between the two of them, but this thought of a Luke and Annabeth ship wasn't over yet. In The Last Olympian, Luke sacrifices himself to save the world, and in his last moments, he asked Annabeth if she ever loved him. This caused questions to arise from fans about Luke's true feelings for Annabeth, and whether or not it was platonic or romantic. Personally, I didn't know what to feel about the scene when I first read it, because I did not really want to entertain the idea that Luke actually liked Annabeth romantically. I mean, Luke was like 23, a literal adult when he died, and Annabeth was 16, like a teenager. The age gap is just so unsettling, and it makes everything just weird by just thinking about it. Annabeth's response to Luke's question in The Last Olympian makes it a bit worse though, as she said, "You were like a brother to me, Luke, but I didn't love you." So it made people question whether or not Luke did love Annabeth in a romantic sense. To be honest, I find it hard to believe that Luke liked Annabeth romantically after admitting in The Lightning Thief that Annabeth was like a sister to him. Why would he shift his view of her that easily? And do I need to mention the age gap again? Luke only showed attraction or liking towards one person, and that was Thalia, who was in his appropriate age range. We read this in the Diary of Luke Castellan book, but nothing about his feelings towards Annabeth. With this weird conclusion to their relationship, I also have to mention an even weirder thing in the Mark of Athena, or the third book in the Heroes of Olympus. Chronologically, the Mark of Athena happens months after the events of the last Olympian, and we get a mention of Luke and Annabeth's perspective through a line that says, "First, there was Luke Castellan, her first crush, who had seen her only as a little sister, then he turned evil and decided he liked her right before he died." So technically speaking, Luke liking Annabeth is canon? I read your thoughts on this, and people are still trying to deny that Luke liked Annabeth. They claim that Annabeth might be an unreliable narrator, and that her fatal flaw was hubris, or deadly pride. They explain that Annabeth might be too proud to admit that someone might not like her back, when she liked said person during that time. I slightly disagree with this though, because it's established in the books that Annabeth has a talent of reading people easily. She can pretty much understand the relationships that people have with other people. This seen again in the Mark of Athena when she instantly knew that Frank Zhang and Hazel Levesque were a couple, even if she hasn't met them yet. She sensed Reyna Ramirez-Arellano's feelings for Jason Grace pretty easily too, and was right about it. And she even knew that Rachel Dare and Percy had crushes on each other in the Battle of the Labyrinth before Percy even saw it. Like, Annabeth has a pretty good skill of reading people, so you usually take her word for it when she describes other people. So going back to this thought she had about Luke, you'd sort of question if something was going on, as Rick sort of makes it clear that Luke liked Annabeth right before he died. This ambiguous ending of Luke and Annabeth's relationship brought up many fan theories about Luke's true feelings for Annabeth. A lot of fans like me tried to ignore the theories that supported the idea that Luke did love Annabeth romantically, because it just felt weird, while others were convinced that Luke did have romantic intentions towards Annabeth. I was wondering how Rick would tackle this in the Disney Plus show, and to be honest, I was not disappointed. Instead of showing that Annabeth had a crush on Luke, they made it seem like Annabeth and Luke were like siblings to each other. We also get a pretty sincere line of Luke admitting to Percy that Annabeth was like a little sister to him. This is kind of like in the book, but this time, they remove Annabeth's crush on Luke, so it seemed like they had more of a family bond. I love this change so much in Luke's character, because it removes the weird liking he had for Annabeth in his last moments, and it makes so much more sense. Also, I would argue that Luke caring for Annabeth as a brother instead of a romantic partner would add up even more, because the one thing that snapped Luke out of Kronos' control in The Last Olympian was Annabeth telling him the infamous line of "Family, Luke, you promised." So establishing Annabeth and Luke's relationship as a familial and sibling-like bond would further support the importance of this quote, and wouldn't it hurt Annabeth more that the person she trusted like a brother turned evil? Like, I feel like it would cut deeper if Luke was like family to her instead of a crush. Added to the fact that Annabeth's crush on Luke just goes away in the next books, it's a good decision to remove it because it was just unnecessary to the plot. Aside from the great addition in the relationship with Annabeth though, one of the biggest changes I saw in Luke's character was the addition of Luke's past in the first season. We only get Luke's past in The Last Olympian, the last book, so seeing it in season 1 of the PJO show is just surprising. I was skeptical about this when I first watched it, but now that I'm looking at it in a different perspective, I actually think it's a great way to set up Luke as a villain. I mentioned in my reviews of the PJO episodes that a constant theme Rick has in the show is that the gods were horrible parents to their demigod children. This theme is pretty much genius, because this would ultimately be the reason for Luke to rebel against the gods. Added to this, they included more information on Luke's past by introducing us to his dad and a mention of his mother. We learned from Annabeth that May Castellan was Luke's mother, and she went insane because of the Oracle. If you want more info on May Castellan, you can check out another video on that, which is linked down below. Anyway, this makes you feel more sympathy for Luke, and added to the scene of Hermes betraying the trio in the Lotus Hotel, it makes you understand Luke more as to why he would hate the gods. Luke grew up with a mentally unstable parent, and a god who left him so early on. It makes you feel bad for him and understand his motives in the last episode. Speaking of the last episode, I also have to point that out. This was the moment I was waiting for throughout the entire TV series, And I was shocked by what Rick and the filmmakers did to Luke's character here. In this scene, Percy figures out that Luke was the lightning thief all along, and Luke surprises all the book readers and the show viewers by admitting that Luke was here to recruit Percy to join the Titan army. This contrasts so much with the book, because in the book, Luke was ready to kill Percy after revealing his betrayal to camp. Luke summoned the Scorpion to kill Percy in the book, but in the show, Luke doesn't want to kill Percy. Instead, he wanted to use Percy as an asset in the Titan army. And to be honest, this was again a great change. Not gonna lie, Luke's attempted murder in the Lightning Thief didn't really make that much sense to me in the book, because ultimately Percy survived. Like, I think Rick decided to add that scene in the book version because he wanted to add more of a shock factor to the audience and give a bit more gravity on how much Luke's words and actions affected Percy. This all changed in the TV show though, because Luke wanted to recruit Percy instead of kill him. And I feel like this moment also teases what Rick mentioned in the Mark of Athena. In a scene wherein Percy and a fellow demigod named Jason Grace are thrown into an arena against giants because of the god Bacchus, Percy thinks to himself that he's around the same age as Luke when Luke joined Kronos. Percy also notes that he understands what Luke feels, because Bacchus is not being helpful by any means to Percy, which opens the conversation of the many similarities that Percy has with Luke. I mean, think about it. Both were the golden boys in Camp Haplid who were constantly wronged and played by the gods in quests, and they both represent two paths both could have gone. Luke chose the dark path with Kronos and wanted to destroy the gods, whereas Percy wanted to solve the issue instead of destroy everything. It makes you realize that Percy and Luke are the different sides of the story, but they're both part of the same coin that the gods placed them in. So seeing Luke ask Percy to join Kronos instead of the attempted murder was genius, because Percy had almost all the reason to say yes. He saw how horrible the gods could be in the show, but he chose the good side instead of Luke's dark path. Also, Luke asking Percy to join Kronos makes a lot more sense too, because Kronos mentioned in the show that Percy is the key to Kronos' return. This would add up well to the scene of Luke training Percy in combat, because Luke is helping Percy be ready for Kronos' return with the thought of using Percy as an asset. So, with all the information on the gods being horrible, Luke experiencing a pretty messed up childhood thanks to his parents, and Percy feeling like he was also abandoned by his father, all add up to the reasons why Percy could have joined Kronos in that one scene. By doing all of this, the show plays Luke in a more sympathetic than evil light. This contrasts quite a lot with the book, because in the book, Luke wanted to murder Percy, and he never showed any sign of a vulnerability. Instead, he looked rather evil without having that much of a build-up on who Luke really was. The show changed this by adding more lore into Luke's character, and the acting that Charlie Bushnell has in episode 8 was incredible. He looked like he was about to cry, as he knew that this betrayal was hurting Percy, and he was trying to make Percy see the darker side of things, which Luke thought was the right side. It also ends more emotionally because we see Annabeth witness everything, and Luke looks devastated. In the book, he probably would have killed them all if this happened, but in the show, he stayed true to his word of not wanting to hurt them and ran away instead. The show made Luke more of a complex character, as the filmmakers gave you reasons for Luke to think this way and join Kronos, but at the same time, it conflicts with the main characters. It's pretty good writing, and I didn't expect that in the Disney Plus show. At this point, let's summarize this video. Luke Castellan is one of the most important characters in the PJO books. He was one of the main villains that Percy and the gang encounter, and I was interested in how Rick would portray his character in the Disney Plus show. Watching the show made me realize that they still kept true to the source material, but at the same time, they managed to improve Luke's character by building him up more for the audience to understand. The book managed to shock the readers with Luke's betrayal, but the Disney Plus show had more of an impact on that betrayal by polishing up Luke's character for the final scene. Instead of showing Luke as an average antagonist who wanted to cause evil, they placed Luke in a more sympathetic light and cleaned up some unnecessary nuances from the book, like Annabeth and Luke's weird relationship. Overall, I'm glad that Rick was able to give another take on his books, and I'm wondering what they'll do to Luke's character in the next season of the show, which would tackle the second book of the Sea of Monsters. So how about you? What do you think of these changes to Luke? Let me know in the comments down below.